Hey everybody, it's Patrick Lovell coming at you on January 17th, 2023 at approximately noon my time. And really, the wall of worry for today is just the debt ceiling and what is going to happen with Fed policy and whether or not we're on a careening train spinning out of control, trying to use the right metaphor, but to a train wreck from hell. Because I've been sensing what I think is going to be a collapse for the past 2 years. In fact, I've expected it for the past 2 years, and I've been shocked that it hadn't already happened. Now, the reason it hadn't happened, in retrospect, looking back, is Fed policy. And Fed policy is really the only thing that's kept the United States and the world afloat since 2009, which of course circles back to our work in the con. But what you need to be considerate of, or very concerned about, or um, shall we say, running for the hills with your pants on fire and your head on fire and the world's going to end, sort of, sort of reaction is to this kind of convergence again of what looks like potentially, what do we like to say when everything comes together in the wrong way at the wrong time? Other than that, I mean, look, we've created what they call the everything bubble, and this has happened. I mean, pretty much 2009 on. So after the global economy collapsed in 2008, instead of actually fixing the problem and recognizing what exactly took place to create the 2008 great financial crisis, we pulled off this ultimate smoke and mirrors, which led me on my adventure turned crusade to understand exactly what took place. But then that led me to understand what took place in the sort of back rooms, if you will, from the Federal Reserve and Wall Street that circumnavigated Congress and the media, both of which were complicit in this scenario to ultimately save the banks and collapse the middle class and everybody who got caught up in that debt trap. That was a complete, criminal setup that was predicated on liar's loans the whole time, not subprime. That's a different scenario, but liar's loans that ultimately turned into liar's collateral and the collateralized debt obligations and all the different synthetics that created derivatives that created $600 trillion of trading that blew up in the world and went sideways, that we had to spend tens of trillions of dollars to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, ultimately buying, toxic assets. And then these goddamn companies, I mean, honestly, a lot of them have been operating as zombie companies, which means that they don't make profit. They just, basically roll over debt. And in the housing market, what we learned a while ago is a rolling loan knows no loss. The same thing happens in corporate America. And then that led to ultimately another bunch of commodity bubbles. And based on what's known as quantitative easing, which was this, Federal Reserve policy that was both providing trillions of dollars of liquidity and also purchasing, and I mean, this was the idea, purchasing the asset-backed securities or mortgage-backed securities from, the primary dealer brokers, the largest financial institutions on the planet, to make sure that they could, secure the debt, hold the debt while buying the debt, and, basically distorting what we call markets. Because in a free market, investors in a capitalistic system are going to be looking for the best, most efficient uses of their capital with the highest returns. And if it works and it's managed properly, that's a great upside. They used to call that long-term greedy. But now, because of modern executive compensation, we're short-term greedy and based on just deception, which is predatory capitalism, which is what created the con, www.thecon.tv. But ultimately, what we're looking at right now is that all of that money, literally the trillions upon trillions of dollars of liquidity, just went to boost up the stocks and the equities of and the real estate of the upper crust. And I mean, it really went to the upper 1%, the 0.001%. I mean, we saw Tesla and Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and so forth, and quite frankly, Zuckerberg. All of these guys made trillions of dollars during COVID, right? That's because of this Fed policy. And now they've since kind of recalibrated in 2022. Obviously, at the end of 2022, I think the largest net value of a corporate, worth was Tesla. I think it lost over 200 billion, or maybe it was actually Elon that lost 200 billion dollars in net worth. I mean, the guy's still worth 40 billion because he cashed out, but I mean, there was just this hyperinflated scenario, and a lot of this policy led to what everybody's heard about, right? The meme stocks and ultimately crypto and all of these other types of, gambling, which were all predicated on the same bullshit. That all of these hedge funds and private equity and asset managers and everybody else, they're taking fees. They're skimming off the top, and the Fed was supporting completely. And that's what's created this just insanity that I have never stopped railing against and trying to open up your minds to understand what exactly is going on so that you understand that you don't live in the United States predicated on liberty and justice for all, the integrity of law, and accountability. That's not the United States anymore. The United States is that you've got this financial industry that operates through criminality, which makes it the mafia, quite frankly, based on all of these smoke and windows that we demonstrate, with incredible clarity in the con, and ultimately that I've done, in a podcast that we did called the New Untouchables, and then also I did a live broadcast with our allies that showed up at the Federal Reserve to protest this because we really wanted to demonstrate what Timothy Geithner referred to as foam on the runway for the crashing financial system back in 2009, were the people that have been destroyed in the foreclosure madness, which were all illegal foreclosures based on documentation fraud and all the kind of stuff that created the liar's loans that ultimately the Federal Reserve backstopped. And you have all of these like hyena players from servicers and foreclosure mills and other actors that were using documentation fraud and all sorts of felonies upon the court, perjury and everything else that the courts just allowed because they were overwhelmed. That's the society that we're living in. And that's what set this whole situation up. And now we've got this political buffoonery in Congress. But, I have a feeling that they're going to work out some sort of solution to the debt crisis because there's the power above the power above the power. In fact, I'm really somewhat cynical about, all of these documents showing up, with Biden. I'm thinking to myself, okay, exactly who discovered these? I mean, it was reported in the New York Times that it was, Biden's lawyers and I think his staff. Maybe they did some sort of audit and they found out maybe that he was in receipt of some of these classified documents, and they decided to make that known because they didn't want to get caught. But another side of me is like, well, shit, maybe there's somebody that's got more power behind the scenes that could actually plant stuff that would make things difficult for him and basically be a pink slip to Joe Biden and being like, adios, we're going to come up with some other solution, because that's the way it's looked like for the last 20 years to me. I mean, when you put together 9/11 in 2008 and whatever COVID was, and ultimately the financial patterns underneath, it looks like, to me, it's not like some sort of mystery in the shadows. It looks to me like they're all out in the open, eyes wide shut. I mean, it's the CEOs of Wall Street and their lobby firms and everybody that works behind the scenes, and not just their lobbyists, but their law firms. I mean, I frequently on these truth bombs have talked about Sullivan and Cromwell, which I think is the apex of everything. But then there's, Covington and Burling, where that's where Eric Holder and Lenny Brewer came out of, and they were the Attorney General and the Assistant Attorney General during Obama that buried all of this stuff. And then we see over and over and over just all sorts of strange, sorts of happenings. I mean, the ICIJ, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, did this magnificent work called the FinCEN Files with BuzzFeed like last year that I think got a little bit of mainstream appetite, and then it kind of disappeared rapidly. But what was it all about? It was all about, laundering money from bad sources throughout the world into our financial system. It was probably one of the biggest stories I've ever seen in my life that just basically was, I think, subverted. And then ultimately, we find out through these Twitter files that yes, indeed, the intelligence agencies were deeply involved with, targeting, certain voices that they wanted censored. And obviously that's now clear. Obviously it's been skewed to the right, but come on, all sorts of anti-establishment left-wing voices were targeted as well. I'm absolutely certain that I was targeted, that the con was targeted. But I can't quite figure out what the symmetry is, because I just think a lot of people out there, like in the Bernie Madoff documentary, they showed the statue, and this has always been in my mind since I've discovered this stuff, of the three monkeys: see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. And that was the same, sort of psychological I don't know, compunction and also dilemma. Somebody like Bernie Madoff's wife, I think her name is, boy, why can't I think of her name? I want to say Ruby, but I'm sorry, I'm forgetting her name at the moment. But Bernie Madoff's wife, I mean, she knew Bernie Madoff since they were 13, and she didn't know anything about the grift that was happening in Bernie Madoff's business. Well, I don't know. Maybe not. I think she knew. I don't think or at least I think she suspected, and then she never asked questions. Okay, that's part and parcel to the system writ large. I think a lot of us in society are like, well, wait, we know the system is rigged and we know it's corrupt, but nobody names names. Nobody says who did what, when, and how, and nobody can actually identify, who the guilty parties and what actually they did, except for what we did in the con, which is the undercurrent of everything. And so I hope that I can impress upon you, those of you who have subscribed, those of you who have liked, please, I always thought this sounded silly when I saw other podcasters do this, but it's true. Please like and subscribe, and please share. Share like crazy. I don't know how close we are to going over the edge again, but from what I've seen, I mean, the numbers. I mean, we know about, we've heard about Carmageddon, right? There's all sorts of stuff that happened in the hyperinflated used car market. That's part of the story. Student loans not being forgiven, or maybe being forgiven. I'm not sure what happened. I think that was written in and then it didn't pass. I don't know what the details are. But meanwhile, I mean, another side of this is all of the madness that took place during COVID, especially when you start to find out about the PPP loan fraud and all of these like really bad actors that were just stealing billions of dollars from the system. Now, a lot of people, from what I understand, that were unemployed got big checks, unemployment checks every week, right? So they could take that money supposedly and throw it into the markets and get into the meme stocks and potentially crypto and everything else, which of course is just another aspect of this dysfunctional economy that's distorted because of Fed policy. It's not the market that's driving everything; it's the Federal Reserve that's driving everything. Did you ever wonder or ask yourself, why is it that everybody's always talking about the Federal Reserve? Well, because the markets depend on the low interest rates, and if they can have quantitative easing. In fact, I just watched an interview with Jamie Dimon, and he was like, well, it all depends on what the Federal Reserve is going to do with regards to quantitative tightening. Now, he made a lot of other points within this interview with Maria Bartoloma on Fox News, and she is a piece of work. She was always on the wrong side of a lot of the stuff, and she's a pumper. That's the whole purpose of Fox Business and CNBC. I mean, these guys were pumping crypto like crazy over the last 2 years. And then they like wring their hands after the fact when somebody like Sam Bankman-Fried goes sideways based on fraud, and they're like, oh my God, and they're trying to play it all. But they're the ones that had like a half-hour shows every day, committed to crypto, for example, right? They legitimized it. no less involved than the celebrities like Tom Brady and Matt Damon and Larry David and Shaquille O'Neal and Stephon Curry and so on and so forth, right? I mean, so. Look, the grand takeaway is this. We live in a debt-fueled society. Everybody needs debt. Wouldn't you love, if you were in credit card debt up to your eyeballs and housing debt and your income goes sideways, that you could just reach into your own private bank and pull out as much money as you need to cover your debt and then roll it over and start again? Well, that's what Wall Street's done with the Federal Reserve. The problem with that is you've got to have a value based on the integrity of underwriting, and that experts know exactly what they're doing. And, for example, in the FTX story, it was called into question again, who are the experts? Because we had, asset managers, the largest on earth. I mean, BlackRock was involved with crypto, which brings, or SPF or FTX, which, creates all sorts of questions. Same with Alameda Research. These guys are huge hedge funds, and their entire, and private equity funds out of the Bay Area, their entire business model is underwriting based on risk management. They're the experts, the ultimate experts. They answer every single question. And meanwhile, they're investing in Sam Bankman-Fried and Alameda Research, which just as simple as it turns out, according to the bankruptcy CEO that became CEO, the guy that came out of the Enron era situation. He's saying he's just telling the world that it was simply Sam Bankman-Fried embezzling money, to do the cross trade from investors and all of that kind of crap. But we have things in play that are supposed to prevent all of this stuff from happening. The Securities and Exchange Commission is one. If you see the Bernie Madoff, documentary, we know, and I show this to you in the con, only infinitely larger. But with regards to Bernie Madoff, this guy named Mark Markopoulos had served on a silver platter the scheme that Bernie was running in 2000, 2002, 4, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And it wasn't until the market collapsed that Bernie got taken down. It wasn't because the Securities and Exchange Commission was doing its job. There's reasons for that. And that's the sole purpose of the Securities and Exchange Commission. So as you're rifling through your feeds and you're listening to people, and however this finds you and whoever I am, and who's my credibility, I'm a voice from the wilderness. I'm a voice that spent 13 years in the trenches, with millions of dollars of resources to go out and get all of the information that mainstream media failed to do. The New York Times failed to give us this information. The Washington Post failed to give us this information. In the early days, the ones who got it right was my friend, who was the boss of Matt Taibbi, who I'm very close with, and I was trying to work with Matt Taibbi forever. Taibbi got so much of this right, exactly right, but he didn't get the full picture right, and that's why we had to make the con. But ultimately now, I'd say, millions upon millions more people know who Matt Taibbi is because of the Twitter files, because Elon Musk gave him the opportunity to do it, and that was born out of, the last many years because of the sort of circumference between, oh God, what was wrong with me? It'll come to me in a minute. Anyway, basically, Matt Taibbi was the go-to guy for a lot of people, particularly Joe Rogan, and that's who I was trying to think of, Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan was trying to get his understanding of how the world works and everything through Taibbi, and justifiably so. Taibbi was the best in the business. Taibbi shifted to be something a little bit different, and then he winds up, doing this whole this whole data dump on the Twitter files, which is extremely important and useful. Yes, we need to know that the FBI and the CIA are deeply intertwined with social media that can shadow ban and prevent important messages like the one that that I continue to tell you from getting to the public. Look, 16 million filed foreclosures destroyed over 50 million Americans directly in the housing collapse. You ever look out at the homelessness if you happen to live on the West Coast in San Francisco and Los Angeles and San Diego and in Las Vegas and Phoenix and Salt Lake City? A lot of that was caused by this. Now, a lot of this many years later is because of drug use and people just can't function in society. That's a different aspect of the story, but I'm telling you, the Armageddon was through the financial terrorism that blew up the country based on smoke and mirrors and based on a fraudulent economy, a fictional economy that we've been living on for 13 years. And it's about to blow again. And so I'm just trying with everything I can to tell you there's a methodology. There's a way this thing works. And there's an easy way to rectify the situation if only we had the courage of the people that were in power, but unfortunately they're not. Revolving door, and also they get their money from this situation. It's just corruption. So we need millions upon millions of people to be informed with the truth that I continue to deliver to you, to understand the composite criminal activity that took over our financial sector and what they got away with that created the madness that we're in. Until we all understand what we're dealing with, there is no way in hell we're going to fix this, because there's just too many weak, cowardly people in media, in power, and really all over the matrix of this story, because everybody gets paid to do what they get paid to do, okay? And ultimately, it's like hyenas at the trough, man. If you go through the housing collapse and you go up the apex to the top, you find out that there's these law firms and that there's these politicians and that there these lobbyists, and then there's these lobbyists and so on and so forth that are all in on this, and they get first dibs and they get the first money and so on and so forth. And then the people down at the bottom, those that really don't have a lot of resources or at the apex of the system, they got destroyed, and they continue to get destroyed. And maybe you're one of them. And if you want to know what happened to you, I'm the guy who's got the answers. Why am I in this? Do I think that if you got, for example, into a loan that you couldn't afford because you couldn't read the small print, that makes you, not accountable? No, you should have to be able. You should never have gotten the loan in the first place. I don't hold the people accountable that got, basically teased with cheese into the rat trap. I mean, so many people just can't see the forest through the trees. They just want to take whatever they can, the easiest way, based on what they're looking at. And if you can get, a lot of money for a house that is hyperinflated and you can roll it over and you can get loans and you can live off of that. That's what millions of people did, and then they got blamed. They're not the ones who created the situation. Yeah, did they play into the situation? Oh, you bet your ass they did. But in the end, what you find out is that, for example, all of those people, because of the madness that took place in the securitization and what happens in the chain of title or the chain of lien title that has to accompany who owns the note or the deed of trust, depending on if it's judicial or non-judicial state, and how this all played out in our registry deeds and everything else. It was like there was an atomic bomb in that system that blew everything up, and so nobody knew anything. And so there was no real collateral. There was no real value for the collateral. And then how do we deal with it? Well, the Federal Reserve just allowed the financial system to etch and sketch everybody away. They buried them in the courts, destroyed their lives, and then they just said, reset, and they did it again. And that's where we are. I hope I'm effective. I'm telling you, it's financial terrorism. It's the inverse perverse of what this country is supposed to be. You're not supposed to have a criminal syndicate that can use predatory capitalism through deceptive acts and practices to destroy millions of people for fees that then ultimately they can reset the trap because the Federal Reserve gives them that option if nobody knows what they're doing. It's the full faith and credit of the United States. And there's so many things connected to it, and that's what you're going to see with this debt ceiling. I mean, the military, pension payments, everything that happens in healthcare. So many things are tied to debts that had already been, approved in Congress, which Congress that's their job. That's fiscal policy. And then because of debt payments, that we get to a point where, oh, wait a second, we can't afford to make our payments as a government. Well, of course we can afford to make our payments because the Federal Reserve can digitize money into thin air and pay it. That's the full faith and credit of the United States. But who amongst you thinks the Federal Reserve should be able to provide trillions upon trillions of dollars to a corrupt financial system? I'd rather spend billions of dollars in rebuilding the Department of Justice and the FBI and the SEC to go after the bad actors with the right people. They exist, but corruption has been able to purge all of this stuff out. Anyway, I'm kind of rambling at this point. I could talk forever. I hope you got something out of this. Please share this message because I don't know if we're close to the end. We actually could be. If they don't do the debt ceiling, which I'm sure they're going to do, and if there's something that breaks in the system, millions of people are going to feel immediate pain. And then as we go forward, you're going to feel immense pain. The kind of pain that I had to endure over the years because of this madness that I went through in 2008 that I spent 13 years trying to get to the bottom of, and I did. And the bottom line is I'm like an island to myself. We've got incredible people that work with me to get this message out. We need more. We need millions of more. Please do what you can to help us by spreading the message because sooner or later, we're all victims of this stuff. Onwards and upwards.